Alrighty. That's it? Oh, I got off easy. Oh,
All right, so with that, I'll turn it over to Amy Brown.
pardon? Oh,
So thank you all for having me. I like to get out of the rat race at the Capitol every once in a while, so I appreciate the invite. As Grant said, what I normally cover are CalPERS issues as well as 37 Act and independent systems. Primarily at the local level, I do cover the state. But before I begin, I've got a little bone to pick with all of you. You stole my fact checker from CalPERS. David Lamoureux is your chief actuary. So I don't have one. So, yeah, I know. Thanks a lot. So I know he's here somewhere, so maybe he could fact check this presentation because I'm looking for a new one. So Grant had asked that I cover about 5 or 6 issues. One, what's going on at the state capitol, recent legislation, status of secure choice, that is the state-run secure choice retirement savings plan that I'll talk a little bit about. And then what I really think is important, and it's sort of the topic on everyone's minds as it relates to defined benefit plans, is this pending California Supreme Court ruling on vested rights, the vested rights doctrine. I'm not going to spend too much time on CalPERS lowering its discount rate because you all have done that already, and so I'm not going to bore you with the details that you already know. And then I want to get on my soapbox and talk a little bit about my own personal opinion on these divestment proposals. That should be an interesting one, and very popular, by the way. And then the pension defaults as it relates to CalPERS, because I do believe that this is an issue that is just starting, that could have bigger implications as time rolls on. So real quick, this kind of puts things into perspective. When I present this information to my local folks, I do it in a way where, the state, has about 60% of those members within the CalPERS system. And I said the big dog here is that they're increasing contributions. So if you haven't done that at the local level, it's going to happen, right? So even though on a larger scale. So the proposed budget from Brown, Governor Brown, back in January, and of course we're going to see changes when the May revision comes out based on the revenues that come in the door. About $5.3 billion for state contributions to CalPERS. This is additional state contributions of approximately $172 million just in this fiscal year. The increasing to about $2 billion when the discount rate changes are fully implemented over a 3-year phase-in, because they felt that going down from a 7.5 to a 7 would just be too much to handle. Total state pension contributions are expected to reach $9.7 billion by 23-24. And that's not just because of the discount rate reductions. CalPERS has what is called a mature plan. So if you look at their members, it's getting to be about half of them are actual retired annuitants. CalPERS needs cash quick, right? And so they're not investing in these long-term risky investments. They're looking at more controlled and conservative investments. So things like real estate, they're considering it less. And then payroll growth is also another thing. I do want to mention, because I get a lot of questions about, well, is the legislature, the governor, interested in rolling back pension formulas and pension costs more than what the Public Employee Pension Reform Act of 2013 did? We refer to it as the PEPRA. And I say no. And here's why. The governor even mentioned in his budget briefing in January. It was interesting. The press corps was there. All they wanted to ask was about the unfunded liability and the pension increases and the like. There were some questions about other things, but that was sort of the topic on the reporters' minds. And he said, "Look, everyone just needs to chill. sorry, he probably didn't use those words, but something along those lines, and saying that the PEPRA rolled back pensions significantly, so just give it time to allow it to work, because as your workforce gets older, the baby boomers retire, you've got an influx of PEPRA employees coming in and filling that system. So you will see some relief in your rates as the PEPRA employees sort of saturate the public sector. So what's happening in Sacramento in particular? The deadline, as you know, to introduce legislation was February 17th. We are right in the thick of policy committees now. There's very little in controversial pensions or other post-employment benefits, basically retiree health care, right? There are some introductions of bills that, I've been doing this for 20 years, will not see the light of day, that are authored by the minority party in the legislature. There's a couple of members of the Republican Party who have introduced bills to lower the PEPRA tiers even more, so it's called PEPRA 2, significantly. And then there's another constitutional amendment proposal that basically says any future increases in pension benefits or OPEBs, retiree health care, would have to be passed by the voters, 2/3 by the votes in that particular district. Very similar to what ex-mayor of San Jose, Chuck Reed, and Carl DeMaio from San Diego wanted to do. If you have any increases, you throw it on the ballot to see if that works. The default would essentially be a 401k for public sector employees. If you have questions about that, we can talk about that, but I'm sure you guys have had several conversations with regard to those. So there are a lot of changes that are going on in the Assembly Retirement Committee and the Senate Retirement Committee. Interestingly, because of term limits, the Assembly has seen over the last, I would say, 5 to 7 years, 8 different chairs. So you gotta question the institutional knowledge. I mean, these guys are great. They're smart people. They got themselves elected. But are they going to know the details of pension law? Probably not. So they look to their chief consultants to sort of get them up to speed on those types of issues. Well, one of the chief consultants on the Senate side retired in December. She had been there for 25 years, in and around CalPERS and the Department of Public Administration, et cetera. And then the other one in the Assembly side retired in January. So, and she had been there for 25 years. They recently hired 2 staff members who have quite a bit of background in public pensions and OPEBs. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we will still see folks who understand pension law as well as you all do. How about that? So again, changes will occur in the courts, in my opinion. That's my prediction, or on the ballot if something gets qualified, if anything. I don't think you're going to see a lot of changes in the legislature. Secure choice retirement savings plans. I won't spend a lot of time on this because Grant's the expert. He put this whole thing together. So if you have questions, direct them to him. Just kidding. This is a SB 1234. This was essentially dubbed as the bookends to the PEPRA. Because one of the big things that we all talked about, myself included, was, our rates are going up, our unfunded liabilities getting bigger, investment returns aren't what they were in the late 90s, early 2000s, when we were all on contribution holidays. But I tell you what, there's another 800-pound gorilla in the room, and that's pension envy, right? The haves and the have-nots. Most of the people in the private sector do not have a pension that they can rely on. They're going to be working till they can't work anymore, whether they keel over and, can't breathe anymore, or whether they have a disability and literally can't do their jobs. We are seeing that over the last 25 years, and there's just this great report that UC Berkeley Labor Research did that basically shows the real pension crisis, and that is those in the private sector that really don't have one. I could tell you a story about my mom calling me up crying, but I'll save that for another day. anyway, so Secure Choice was sort of the bookends. The governor put in about $15 million as a loan in his general fund as a startup. It's basically a 3% a deduction from the employees' paychecks. And the reason why the chamber and a bunch of business groups didn't oppose this thing was because the employer wasn't responsible for paying. Now, instead of having an opt-in, because we know how that works, this is an opt-out. So if you've got some young guy who has a new truck and has an expensive girlfriend and he doesn't want to pitch the money in and wants to, he's got to read that he's making a really bad choice to not invest in his own personal pensions and actually opt out. So they make it a little bit of a challenge. And then there's a 3-year implementation process. According to the treasurer, there's about 70 to 90% compliance rate after this goes fully through, and it touches upon about 6.8 million California workers. That's quite a bit. Now, Congress has taken a whack at these state-run plans with HJR 66. That has passed Congress. It's now in the Senate. But because I did a little research before I did this, no thanks to David Lamoureux, I actually called Grant. What we're learning is that since this isn't a mandated plan, and it is an opt-in, opt-out, that it may not be subject to HJR 66. My guess is that there are going to be plenty of lawyers making a lot of money on that one. Do you have anything to add?
Well, just that's pretty much right. It's just that it's not a true opt-out because there is an affirmative step that somebody would have to take to sign something before they enroll.
Okay.
And Steve from the Treasurer's Office shaking.
Thank you, Steve.
Before you go on in,
Yeah.
I have here.
There was a passing reference to contribution holidays.
Yes.
Just to set the records straight, here at CalSTRS, we don't participate in contribution
Good for you.
holidays.
Well,
Never-
you guys did it right.
Yeah, never have,
You paid the whole time. Well,
never have, never will.
let me tell you something. There were hundreds and hundreds of local agencies who were considered super funded and didn't pay a dime for years during the heyday. So I commend this board.
CalSTRS never has, never will
Thank you.
participate.
You guys should
That's
be
it.
commended. And maybe you can have a little talk with your locals about that next time we experience a economic upturn. Okay, recent case law involving vested rights. So my labor friends over in the Capitol don't think these things are much of a big deal. I'm going to play Chicken Little here and say they are, okay? The Orange County case was kind of the first one, not necessarily the absolute first one, but the first one who really tested whether or not retiree health care was a vested benefit. And just real quick, the retirees paid their own premiums, but they were a part of a commingled plan with the actives because they got a better rate. And when the county decided to split those commingled plans out, the retirees' rates went up significantly. They filed suit. It was called the REAC case. They filed suit and said, hey, wait a second. This was a vested benefit that you promised us. But the courts ruled that since it wasn't explicitly stated in a contract, a binding contract, then too bad, guys, you're going to pay the increase. And then I'll just go through M&G Polymers USA versus Tackett. This is a famous one, not necessarily something that happens in the public sector, but we keep this on our radar. Basically, the courts ruled that vesting of retiree health benefits must be analyzed based on ordinary contract principles. What that means is if you do not have an explicit statement in your contract about something along the lines of this is a vested benefit promised to you at date of employment, it shall never be taken away from you no matter what, even if the earth cools again and we're all going down in flames. Basically, if you don't have that sort of statement, and I'm not an attorney, but I think that would be a really good one to write in your contract, then they could reasonably decrease your retiree healthcare benefits. I already talked about the REAC case. So what is happening at the local level, and I throw it out here because I think it's an interesting conversation to have. A lot of local agencies And some school districts, I believe, as well, are opening up these 115 irrevocable trusts. And what they are is sort of this earmarked fund that they could put money aside to help pay down OPEB obligations. There's one association that does it. CalPERS attempted to run a bill to do this with retirement as well. Labor wanted sign off that there was some statement in the bill that said the bargaining units had to agree that you could open some, essentially a trust. The League of California Cities and the State Association of Counties disagreed. That bill was never run. But here's the interesting part about this. What is happening is when management is going to start negotiations on this particular issue with their bargaining units, they're saying, look, retiree health care is, our unfunded liability on retiree health care is growing. We can't, keep up with the payments. We're going to have to ask you to help us to pay, whether it's we'll give you a raise, we'll split it in half, call that a cost of living adjustment, dump the other half into an irrevocable trust. They're saying, labor responding, sure, we'd be happy to have that conversation with you, but guess what? We're gonna open up that contract and have some information in there that says this is an explicit vested right if they don't have one in particular. Because labor's perspective, and I agree with them, is I'm putting money in, I don't want it to the chance to have that taken away. Now on to the California rule, and basically, and I'm probably not telling you anything you don't already know, but the California rule basically says that the benefit that is promised of date of employment is the benefit that you get when you retire or move to a different agency and have it transferred. So this is applied to unearned prospective time on the books, right? Well, okay, so there was AB 340. This is an interesting little factoid. AB 340, when it was going through the legislative process, they also included the companion bill, AB 197. I think it was AB 197 or 187. So David could correct me on that if he remembers. Yeah, PEPRA. PEPRA. They split the two. PEPRA had the 60-page whatever. AB 197 was a three little dinky page document, and it had to do with the Ventura decision and pension spiking. So you can't sit there and factor in all this pensionable compensation issues into your final comp, right? You can't have differential pay and uniform pay and out of class pay and all that stuff be lumped in and calculated on your final comp, because what was happening was people were retiring with more money than having them be in their jobs, right? So they're getting more money as a retiree. What AB 197 did was it applied that to current employees within the 37 Act system. This didn't have anything to do with CalPERS. Well, the Marin County Employees Association said, hey, wait a second. That's unconstitutional because of the California rule. And what you promised us of date of employment is what we should get. So they filed suit. Well, what happened was that the First District Court of Appeal kind of lumped in this larger discussion, right? It wasn't just about those pensionable comp items. He's now saying, Justice James Richardman is now saying that the pension is not an immutable entitlement to the most optimal formula of calculating the pension benefit. And he goes on to talk about, let me go back. He goes on to talk about this concept of reasonable versus must. And I tell you, we have spent way too much time on those two words. What he's saying to us is basically that you can lower benefits prospectively if you approach it reasonably and you prove that there's financial hardship if you continue with the promise of those benefits. A huge deal. There's another case dealing with airtime. Firefighters filed suit against the fact that, the PEPRA did away with airtime. I wanted to buy airtime. I was planning on it. The PEPR goes into effect, and now I don't have that. That was promised to me, date of employment. Well, the appellate court rule, very similar to this one. Those two issues are at the state Supreme Court and will be heard soon, I'm hearing. So, questions about that? The timing. Okay, soapbox. Not that I was on one up until now. Okay, here's the deal on this. Look, you look at all these issues: apartheid, Iran, coal, Exxon, tobacco, Turkey, the Dakota pipeline, and now the wall. I'm from Santa Cruz. Look, I'm a tree-hugging lib. My politics are all in line with this. But then you put on my economic hat, and I'm starting to cringe because this is a very popular thing to do in the legislature, and I'm a little worried about it, and here's why. The CalPERS board, and you guys are probably well aware of this, did an analysis on how much they lost with divesting in tobacco, right? It was a lot of money. They're estimating between like $3 and $5 billion over that time period. For a mature plan who's looking at decreasing their discount rate and jacking up contribution rates for their members, could have probably used that money, right? It's a horrible and uncomfortable political conversation to have, right? But I can say it because, I have no skin in the game, and who knows? No one's going to unelect me for saying the things I'm saying. Anyway, does it change behavior as well? Who knows? I mean, it's a great issue, right? The retired CEO previous to this one had mentioned, these divestments, although, great with regard to environmental and social justice issues, do they change behavior? We don't know the answer to that, but if you remove us from the table as an investor, we're definitely not going to change behavior. And maybe what we can do is advocate on behalf of some of the changes that are prompted by the divestment conversation to begin with, right? So, look, there's three. We saw maybe one divestment bill every other year. Now we're seeing 3 and 4. When do we say stop? Now, I understand with the coal issue, there was a provision in there that basically allowed you and CalPERS to determine whether or not divesting in coal companies would have a financial hardship on the fund. And that's great. So maybe is that the silver lining in all this? I don't know. My opinion is let the market change the behavior. And we see that in some cases. Now, legislation, look, I'm all for legislation changing behaviors. Like I said, UC Santa Cruz, just don't divest in marijuana. Okay, that's all I ask. All right. And then, like, CalPERS lowers its discount rate. I already mentioned the plan maturity, the investment environment, and then the mortality increase. Good news and bad news. We're all living longer. Bad news. We're all living longer. According to David Lamoureux, that's like the worst news ever. Oh, David, you came back because I've been talking about you pretty much the whole time. Okay, are you fact checking me? Okay, so basically. Women, by the way, living longer than men, 1 year. So yay to us. Anyway, this is going to have several implications on what I am seeing. Again, may be playing Chicken Little here, but what I'm seeing is the first of many devastating issues that CalPERS and maybe some 37 Act folks have to face. And I want to bring it to your attention because you're like, okay, where is the city of Loyalton? I don't know. Oh, yeah, you do. Well, you're the one. So Loyalton, population 718 people. They defaulted on their payment. And And CalPERS triggered a 60% reduction in 5 of their retirees. The retirees are on the front page of the paper saying, I may have to, foreclose on my home. And this is the first time in CalPERS' history. Hopefully, they're doing some sort of deal to make sure that those retirees are kept relatively whole. But, we stopped paying attention to Loyalton, and now we're paying attention to 9 agencies who've either passed resolutions in the past 2 years, notices to terminate, or are delinquent 31 days or more, or have defaulted on their payments. Water districts, RDA, redevelopment associations, fire districts, these are all small, but again, I think it might be a snapshot of things to come. Here's the biggie. Here's the big daddy, okay? And you may have read about this. The East San Gabriel Valley HR, it's a JPA that was formed by 4 cities, Covina, West Covina, 2 others, I can't remember. They lost funding in 2014, so they, terminated the employees. They went delinquent on their payments in 2015 because their fund was 37% funded. And their price tag to CalPERS was, something like a little over $100,000 or $400,000. This affects 197 members. 191 of them are classic employees. There was a 63% reduction for those 191 members at 2% at 55, and 24% reduction for the 6 Pepper members. That's huge. So CalPERS is looking at how do we protect these. So they went back to the 4 cities and they go, look, even though the JPA doesn't exist, you're still on the hook for these employees. And they said, no, we're not. Go find it somewhere else. So CalPERS is sitting on a major issue, right? Because they take these requests for JPA formations, and they look at viability, and, David could probably tell you the stuff they go through in terms of granting those requests. But CalPERS is now sitting on those formation requests because they don't want another East San Gabriel Valley issue to come to head, right? So they may be looking at future guarantee of obligations. So you would have, if you're going to come to CalPERS and form this JPA, you got to, sign in blood that you're not going to, kick your employees out of a benefit that was promised to them. And that's it. And you can text me even after 2 a.m. I'm always up. Jesus. Anyway, if you have any questions, I'm here for another 10 or so minutes. You're welcome.
I just wanted to say, Amy, appreciate your candor. It's really refreshing to just have you say it like it is. And I do read the Public Retirement Journal. I think board members receive that, so I appreciate.
You're the one. I appreciate it.
It does. I was just going to say, it feels like kind of a little niche kind of area, but obviously for us on the board, it's certainly something I think about and obsess over all the time. And anytime I've read all the articles in the paper about the issues that you raise, and so I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I wonder, what, just from an outsider that you have no skin in the game, because you're just kind of watching, what advice do you have for trustees of funds like CalPERS and CalSTRS around some of the, the issues we're facing around like divestment? And do you have any thoughts of like, how do you navigate?
Yeah,
that's what you're saying about engagement.
Okay, well, there's 2 issues, right? The contribution rates, right? And I think the advice I give you is the stuff you're already doing. So I have nothing to add with that. The divestments, that's a tough one politically, right? Because you don't want to be in committee going, I oppose AB such and such, which, divests from Trump's wall. You're not going to be very popular in that regard. My suggestion would be to come with facts and not look at it from a piecemeal perspective, but more from divestments as a whole, and have those discussions generally with members of the legislature and say, bring information to them and say, this is what divestments has cost us in the past, if you have that kind of data. and say, we have a fiduciary responsibility to our members, and we love the fact that you're tackling these social and environmental justice issues, and we support you and salute you, but generally divestments hurt us. And you come at them with numbers, right? You get out of the emotional political space and you start talking brass tacks. It's like the tobacco thing. Like, people shouldn't be smoking. They still do. But those, I would argue, sorry for those smokers in the audience, if it's 10 packs, if it's $10 a pack, they're probably still gonna pay for it, right? So what you need to do, instead of get mired in those particular details about right and wrong on the issue, you need to bring the numbers with you and say collectively, right? Just and have those conversations probably without a microphone in your face.
Yeah.
And not just the cost of divestment, but also what we lose by not having a seat at the table to engage.
Exactly. Ann Stossbell said it perfectly. You remove me from the table, I can't effectuate change with those folks. That's it. Yeah, you're right. Tom?
So this is on divestment, and it's very much in line with Grant's point about having a seat at the table with the people. How do you think the legislature would react on some of these issues if we and some of the other custodians of public money in California organized ourselves to take our activism up a notch? Yeah. So instead of saying divest companies involved in the pipeline, we're going to show up at shareholder meetings and adopt resolutions and be as aggressive on the governance point as we are on corporate governance, and trying to file lawsuits and join the cases. I think that would... That's
how you're going to change. That's how you're going to change behavior, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's frankly what institutional investors in California and other places should be doing. And I wonder if we would get support for that in the legislature.
So Tom, I just came up with an idea. Good, bad, or otherwise. I have a lot of them. Maybe, perhaps, what the legislature could do is generally have these committees, the retirement committees on both sides, have an informational interview on the overall divestment sort of end results. Like, what have we seen over the course of the last 20 years or so when these divestment issues have come forward, and are they working? What's the end result, right? What's the goal? No one's really asking that question. I know what on the face of it, it's to stop to thumb someone in the nose for doing something bad, right? But what's the end result? And maybe the legislature could have an informational hearing about that and bring stakeholders in and ask questions. Get David Lamoureux up there to answer some questions.
Thanks, Dana, and thanks, Amy, as always, for your candor. To Tom's point, I don't think either fund does a very good job of actually being very, very transparent about what we do on the whole corporate governance front with respect to how we work with companies in trying to change behavior, and whether it's through our vote or through other types of engagement. But I think that has to be something that just is just increasing the awareness and knowledge of that in the legislature is really key. If we're going to try to affect behavior, I mean, we've had a longstanding policy of not divesting, and I think we should up our game relative to broader education about engagement and the benefits of engagement. The other thing I wanted to ask you was, Governor Brown's been obviously very aggressive in this area, not only just with PEPRA, but also with respect to bargaining for retiree healthcare, prepayment of retiree healthcare, and very appreciative of his adding the additional funding for the state employer contribution increase. What do you foresee in terms of that legacy being carried out by future gubernatorial candidates?
Oh, great question. Oy, oy, oy.
And how could we help in terms of keeping this on the...
So, well, it's a good thing you've got Irena here, so she can help with making sure that those funds are continued to be paid for. I think that depending upon the next governor, I do believe that they're going to take a look at the state's obligation and say, wow, we have to continue to be prudent financially in this. I do believe that they will continue, once these contracts are up with the state bargaining units, that they will continue to partner with those employee organizations to make sure that either you're pre-funding retiree health care, paying down your unfunded liability with retirement. So I'm hopeful that those practices will continue, and even if we see an uptick in our economy and investments, we're sort of flat right now, that we've all learned the lesson of the early 2000s, late 90s. I hope we never go back there, and I'm hoping that our friends, our labor friends as well as management friends and smart people like Irena will constantly remind folks the history lesson of what got us here in the first place, right? So I'll talk to those folks over there too. I'll be candid.
Yeah, as I will undoubtedly argue later on when we get to state legislation, I believe that engagement is the right answer almost in every case, but not just engagement with the parties that we're trying to affect, but also with the legislature. And that's why I'm not convinced that having positions on bills that aren't likely to move serves this body very, very well, because it just infuriates those folks that we want to get to do the right thing. And I would also say that in some cases, that divestment isn't equal across all boundaries. If we were to have a proposal that and maybe this would already be restricted by the federal government, that no investments in Syria after what happened this past week, I don't think as a conscious board that we could stand aside and say that is an important thing for this board to consider. So while I generally support the notion that we shouldn't tie our hands with regard to divestment, I think we have to take them one by one. We will have a general policy that's going to argue against any divestment policy, but I think you can't necessarily assume that every possible proposal is a bad proposal. So, but I know we're going to talk a lot more about that when we get to legislation.
Sure.
So I was just gonna make a suggestion, and I'm wondering if can we direct staff, Grant and his team, to take Amy up on her recommendation of, can we make a suggestion to the two committees about an information item around engagement?
I mean, the heavy lifting will have to be on investment staff, but I think that could be a good idea.
Investment staff would be up for it, I think.
Because I think that role of legislative oversight and the legislature holding hearings like that to really get a better understanding of issues that they write bills on, it's really key, important. So
I just concur with what Betty and Steve have both mentioned, and I also feel more and more as though I think there are issues that the state can take a significant point on, and we're the fifth largest economy right now, or the numbers change, but we're a large economy, sixth, and I know for me, just having CalSTARS and CalPERS in the crosshairs at every conversation around divestment, I think it does put us in some challenging situations, and I would love to see the state and state leaders and legislators focus more on maybe the economic power we wield as a state, and not just the two pension funds. And I'd like to get to that place and not have to be reacting to legislation that comes up. And I think building, I know we're doing this already, building a relationship with legislators, educating them like we did on the funding. But I'm looking for, and I'm excited about Ann Sheehan's presentation, item 9. I think that will help the public and us understand more about our engagement policy. But I guess I would like to see us do that heavy lifting, I guess, at the Capitol with those two committees, especially because we're aware of we know Karen, and is it Sam? Who's the other one?
Karen's gone.
Karen's gone.
It's Michael.
And Pam. And we knew them
No,
from.
Bolden.
I
Okay.
bonded with them going to meet legislators back in, when the funding, 3 years ago. And so I think with that change, it's almost like we need to kind of re-educate them, so.
Madam Chair, members of the board, I want to be respectful to our guests because I think they both.
He's kicking me out because I'm creating more
not at
work
all.
for him after, as I talk.
How
No,
dare
thank
he.
you.
So
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate
Amy,
it.
Mindy,
Thank
thank
you,
you so
thank you,
much. You've left us
Mindy.
a lot to think about and fascinating information
thank you so much
presented
for
well.
being here.
Thank you very much. All right, we're gonna go ahead and recess for lunch. But as we do, you wanna do, you gonna do it? No, you do it, you do it,
Okay.
you do it. Go ahead.
So yesterday, towards the end of the investment committee meeting, we received a report from Ms. Smith and gave us an opportunity last night to review that report. Does
Oh,
anyone,
that's right, we were gonna
would
talk about
anyone
it for
like
lunch.
for us, does anyone have questions about that? Or are we ready just to accept the report as it's been presented and not meet with Ms. Smith during our lunch? Everyone okay? Okay,
Pleasure of the, pleasure of the board?
I'm sorry, the investment committee was recessed.
recess.
It's now reconvened.
Yes.
Right.
And now the question is one of assent as to what, as to the general temperature of the board.
So are we bringing Ms. Smith back with us or not? We don't see any need to, so we've accepted that report. Thank you for the presentation. I entertain a motion to adjourn
So moved.
the investment committee. Thank you. Thank you, Brian.
So, but before we go to lunch, we'll do a half hour, duty-free. You're looking at me like, huh? Half an hour for lunch.
I thought you said duty-free.
Duty-free, yeah, we get a half an hour duty-free lunch.
I was thinking airports
Yes,
and
no,
buying
no.
alcohol. or something.
But as we do that, I'd like for us to all congratulate Tom, who has, he's receiving from the Advancement Project Champions for Equity Awards, the Transformative Partner at the end of the month. So let's give Tom a big hand.
Thank you.
It seemed like an appropriate time to say that.
Oh, thank you. It's a voting rights activist group.
Yep,
That's so
so,
cool.
thank you.
That's very appropriate on today.
Brian?
As long as
We
we're
work with you, yeah.
congratulating
Yeah,
people, I think we should congratulate Paul, who became a grandfather for the second time yesterday.
Oh, there you go.
We will be,
Oh.
we will be.
There you go.
But close.
Congratulations, Grandpa. All righty, we're recessed for a half hour.